Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. School funding is our topic today. You can join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001. Or you can text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by Jim Lee, President and CEO of Susquehanna Polling and Research. In your new poll, you asked which three issues will influence a vote. And talk about number one. Which one rose to the top, Jim?
The issue of crime and public safety, Larry, was rated the number one issue that voters say will most influence their vote for a candidate in 2024. Now, the crime issue usually plays to the strength of Republicans. They have continued to maintain a narrative that liberal and progressive district attorneys around the country have been very unwilling to enforce the laws on the books to keep criminals behind bars. That's an issue that typically plays to Republican strengths. But as we saw in the last midterm election with Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman in the race for U.S. Senate, the issue was not a successful strategy for the Mehmet Oz campaign. So there's still not a convincing argument to be made that with Republicans in power, crime will go down.
Jim, when a poll of this nature is given and the question is about crime, and then that rose to the top of your list, are there specific events in poll takers' minds when they answer a question like that? If so, what do you suppose they were?
I think voters are responding to the media reports they see day in and day out, Larry, of crime rising in major cities. We see it in Chicago, we see it in Philadelphia, we see it in the big metropolitan areas of New York. So I think when we've tested the crime issue, it's not that we found that most people feel their own local neighborhoods are becoming less safe. It's that they're responding to the media reports of crime and lax punishment of criminals. You see it with burglaries in California, with the snatch and grab burglaries, where the prosecutors refuse to prosecute certain crimes if the theft amount was under a certain threshold. So there's a growing frustration that no one's manning the store and that criminals are not being kept behind bars if they're in fact dangerous to the community.
Jim, here's another question that appeared on your poll, and it asked if the election were held today for president with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who would you vote for? How did that come out?
What this poll shows is that Biden maintains a 7-point margin over Donald Trump. Now, big picture here, Larry, we polled this same question in September of last year, and Biden was at 47% and Trump 45%. So what's happened in the intervening months? Trump lost some support in the current poll in comparison to where we had him in September of last year when he was at 45%. He's now down to 39%. Well, what's really happened? Well, the Republican presidential sweepstakes have happened. We see a lot of Republican voters that are now back on the fence about Trump because Nikki Haley is the elephant in the room right now. She's competing for Trump with Trump in New Hampshire as we speak today. Today's election day in New Hampshire. And we've seen a lot of Republicans take the fight to Trump in the Iowa caucuses and now in New Hampshire. As a result, Trump is underperforming with Republicans in this poll. He's only getting 77% of the Republican vote, Larry. And to win a state like Pennsylvania, he needs 95% of the Republican votes before he can even begin to appeal to these moderate swing voters that make up a third of the state's electorate.
Let's move on to another question on your poll, Jim, and this is in regard to the race for U.S. Senate. And if the U.S. Senate race were held today between Bob Casey and Dave McCormick, who would you vote for? And Casey is ahead on that. And tell us, Jim, how has Casey made a favorable impression on the people that took your poll?
Well, this race again, big picture here, Larry, shows a competitive landscape for Dave McCormick and Bob Casey. Voters have to keep in mind, Casey was elected in 2006. He's seeking his fourth reelection bid. And the fact that he's under 50% after so many years in the U.S. Senate suggests there's some weakness to him. Now, Casey is known as a backbencher. He doesn't chair any really exciting committees. He's the chairman of the Special Select Committee on Aging, which, okay, is important to Pennsylvania's population, but it doesn't have the same kind of appeal had he been chairman of a committee like Transportation or Appropriations or Ways and Means or Energy and Commerce. So Casey's reputation has been to stay under the radar. And he has some accomplishments. I was looking at some of the statistics that have been published about Senator Casey. He has some formidable accomplishments, but I want to point to an important article written by Mark Levy in the Associated Press last year. He said, quote, Casey has backed all of Biden's top priorities since he's been in the U.S. Senate. Biden is the elephant in the room in this race because Biden's approval rating is very low in Pennsylvania. And in my opinion, voters are punishing Casey for Biden's bad popularity because the election presumably will be a referendum on the incumbent president and Senator Casey's support for the Biden policies. And it looks like, based on this poll today, Casey hasn't completed the sale that he deserves 51% support by the voters of Pennsylvania. This race will be one to watch. It's a national race, Larry. It has national implications for the U.S. Senate. And the fact that McCormick's polling only 4 points behind Casey is very, very impressive from the McCormick campaign's perspective.
Jim Lee of Susquehanna Polling and Research, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, Larry. Thank you.
More PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back to the PCN Capitol Preview. Our guests are the chairman of the House Education Committee, Jesse Topper for the minority, and Peter Schweyer for the majority. Representative Schweyer is going to join us in a few minutes on Zoom. In the meantime, Representative Topper, how big is the stream of money that funds education here in Pennsylvania?
Well, when you factor in all the line items in the budget, it takes up well over a third of our budget. And of course, we all know that education is also funded at the local level as well. So there's it's a hybrid system, which is very complicated. Money coming from both the state and the local levels, and I think that's why you see so many of the battles over the years, where you have school districts that in some areas the Commonwealth are well funded locally, some are not, and so the state tries to pick up the burden for those that are not, and so that it leads into a lot of questions. We've talked about for many years local property taxes, but from a state perspective, it is one of the largest, if not the largest single chunk of our budget.
Representative Schweyer has just joined us. Welcome, Representative. We're talking about the basics of education funding here in Pennsylvania. And how is that funding distributed among our more than 500 some school districts?
Well, obviously not very equitably. And thank you so much for the invitation to join us. I'm sure my friend and colleague, Chair Topper, did an excellent job of explaining some of that beforehand. But I will say this. In theory, what we do is we take our $7.9 billion of funding that we spend in school-based in funding for our public schools, our 500 school districts, and it's distributed via a formula. Now, the formula, the basic education formula, has two major components to it. The first is all of the funding that we used to do, and then there's a second piece that we call the new funding. And unfortunately, what we've done historically is only since the adaptation of the last formula 4 or 5 years ago or so, maybe it was 6 years ago at this point in time, COVID has changed a lot of perspectives on time. We've only put what's the new money through that formula. And that has created a situation where we have a wide variety of schools that get funding based on on population. There's wide fluctuations in that, and that was really a big chunk of the basis of the court decision. So we take $7.9 billion. We put the overwhelming majority of it through an old formula, the rest of it through a new formula.
And Representative Schweyer, just refresh us on what the new formula involves. Try to tell us in the simplest terms you can how money funnels through that.
Well, there are really three pieces. Piece number one is that we level set the base at the current number, which means that $7.9 billion, whatever any school district got beforehand, they're able to get again. The second piece is if we are successful in implementing the basic ed plan, the recommendations of the Basic Ed Funding Commission. Every year for the next 7 years, every school district would get to share in an additional $200 million that flows through the formula. The third piece, and the most important part, at least as far as I'm concerned, is that there's a new part that is an equity supplement. And what that will do is those school districts that are most at risk, those school districts that have historically been underfunded or that are growing exponentially and the state support is unable to keep up, we give those school districts a significant bonus to try to catch them up to where they should be.
Representative Topper, you heard Representative Schweyer, and he commented that educational funding is not equitable, basically, here in Pennsylvania. How do you feel about it?
Well, regardless of how I feel about it or Chairman Schweyer feels about it, there's a court ruling that says that it's not. And look, I tend to agree with parts of the court ruling. We know what it's like to try and distribute funds through a formula when we have school districts of every different size, school districts that are located in parts of the state that are completely different in terms of socioeconomic demographics. I would contend it's almost impossible to try and develop a system that actually hits what those marks should be. But it's incumbent upon individuals like Chairman Schweyer and myself to attempt to work through to come up with something that I would say is the most fair. That word, the word fairness, equity, can mean a lot of different things. We're trying to make sure that it means one thing, which is that every student, regardless of zip code, has the opportunity to succeed, and that's going to create. We're going to have to create a lot of different options for that to happen. But I also want to say that what Chairman Schweyer said is correct in terms of the funding component. What has been done the last several years to try and address that. What he described is what maybe some of our viewers have heard or listeners as level up. That was kind of the intermediate way that we were trying to address some of those needs. So with the commission, yes, there are recommendations, but also over the past couple of years, we have tried to find ways to remedy it. Hopefully, with the adaptation of some of the recommendations from either or both of these reports, we'll be able to reach that in a more fuller context.
Well, let's get deeper into that, Representative. Representative Schweyer, you and Representative Topper were members of the Basic Education Funding Commission, and I say were because the work of that commission is behind you at this point. But let's take a step back even farther and consider, why was this commission formed in the first place? Representative Schweyer.
Well, this commission actually exists in statute. This isn't the first one of these commissions that we've had. This is the second or the third one. And we are required, the legislature is required by law to go through this process every 5 years. Now, COVID set us back a few years. The commission was delayed for several years because of the pandemic. But this is a regular attempt to try to look at how we distribute money for our schools. And the goal is very admirable. The goal is to take a lot of the politics, as much of the politics, out of the budgeting equation as possible. Nobody wants the days where some leader of one of the four caucuses is able to negotiate an unfair advantage for his or her school district, or we don't want education funding to become a political football pitting communities against each other. That's not the goal. The goal is to have very sane education funding policies, and so that's why it exists, and that's why we go about it in this manner. And I think by and large, I don't want to speak for Chair Topper or any of the other members of the committee, but I will commission, excuse me. But it was a very important process for me, getting to see and learn. We heard from more than 100 superintendents across the Commonwealth. We visited everywhere from Fayette County to Philadelphia and points in between. And it was a really, really interesting process. And I think the product that we adopted ultimately was a good one.
And before we get into the recommendations from that report, Representative Topper, I want to consider the perspectives of the members on this commission. Yours is legislative, obviously. What other points of view were represented amongst the commission members?
Well, we had members of the legislature, those of us who were appointed by our leadership, including the 4 chairs of the education committees in the House and the Senate. We also had members of the administration who appointed. So you had all both House, Senate, and
legislative, executive.
That's correct. Legislative and executive were involved, and that's what made up the voting portion of the commission. But there was also a great deal of staff work behind the scenes, and as Representative Schweyer mentioned, we heard from stakeholder groups, we heard from parents, we've heard from students throughout the Commonwealth, and to be able to travel and see one another's districts, see how education and the system really impacted those communities, and vice versa, how the communities impacted the system of education. Look, I said from the beginning that my goal was to learn, and I did learn quite a bit. I think at the end of the day, the ultimate what separated this commission from the previous 2 was the expectation, the expectations that were brought about by the court ruling, expectations that were brought about by the previous budget impasse, which really was surrounding education. And I think perhaps some of those expectations in the end were unrealistic in terms of what the commission itself could do. But I do believe that we were able to even though we weren't able to come to consensus around one particular report, there were areas that we were able to come to consensus around, and hopefully a lot of the information that's out there, a lot of the recommendations that are out there, the General Assembly and the administration can look at and say that this really gives us a good foundation to move forward in terms of the creation of public policy.
Viewers, you can call our show and participate in this discussion about education funding here in Pennsylvania, and the number is 1-877 PA6 5001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. Representative Schweyer, pick up that thread if you would. Representative Topper was talking about the expectations going into the commission's work this year, and then he cited specifically that court ruling that ruled that Pennsylvania's funding of education was unconstitutional. Talk about expectations.
I agree with Chair Topper that the expectations that were levied on us on this commission were extremely high. But I don't actually think that started the expectations on what the Commonwealth should do. I don't think it started with the beginning of these hearings. I really think it started with the minute that the court ruling came down back in January about what we were going to have to do as a Commonwealth to change what we're doing and how we fund public education. And, so we have run in a very bipartisan way. I mean, Chair Topper and I are friends, and we've done a tremendous amount of work on the committee. We've started the process of addressing the issues that came up, many of the issues that came up in the court ruling well before this commission started. We passed a bipartisan school construction plan. Which was, something that was parts of which were adopted in the budget, parts of which were adopted as part of the roadmap that the Basic Ed Funding Commission wrote. We passed bipartisan legislation on addressing the teacher shortage. We've passed bipartisan legislation on cyber reforms. I wish that was one a little bit more bipartisan than it was, but at least it was an honest attempt to move the conversation forward. All of these are things that we learned about and heard about in the court case, and that were many of those conversations carried forth into the Basic Ed Commission. So in spite of the fact that we were unable to come to consensus on one report, to Chair Topper's point, there were a lot of points in those in the minority report and the majority report that were largely agreed upon. And frankly, a lot of that work we had started as a committee in the House months beforehand. And just being able to bring, frankly, our friends in the Senate along for some of those conversations point out a lot of the efforts that have already been done. I think, although the expectations were high at the commission, I think those expectations were set months beforehand.
So let's get into the recommendations of the report, Representative Schweyer. And you said that there was agreement between the parties on some of the major issues. And so I take it what would be done as well. So as far as you're concerned, go into some highlights of that report, recommendations, things that you want to see done.
Yeah, so I will say I want everything that was in the majority report done. The highlights again were level set. We had three fundamental goals throughout this process: create a sense of adequacy so that kids got what they needed, a sense of equity so that regardless of which school district you were born in and live in, you have the opportunity to learn and successful. And lastly, a sense of stability for all of our schools.
So how do you achieve that, Representative Schweyer? That remains the key question.
Well, let's go in reverse order. So stability was an area of widespread agreement between the House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, and the administration. We reset our base, which is a fancy way of saying we're never going to cut money from that $7.9 billion that we already spent.
The district is always going to get at least what it got before.
Correct. And we added an additional predictable percentage of a $200 million increase that will go to every school district. So we created a sense of stability. The second thing we did was we added that equity supplement to be able to, the adequacy supplement to be able to bring up all of those school districts that fall below the line. Lastly, we had a number of recommendations, a menu of options, if you will, that every school district would be able to pick from, but it puts guardrails on our school districts to make sure that if the Commonwealth is spending billions of additional dollars over the course of the next 7 years, that they're using those funds for tried and true methods that will actually improve the scores of our students and actually impact student achievement.
So, Representative Topper, what do you think of what Representative Schweyer is saying here?
Well, we'll go with the last piece, which is very important, which is the accountability piece. That these dollars, whatever. I mean, look, I've been in the General Assembly now 11 years, and never once during those 11 years has education spending gone down. We've continually seen the spending go up, and yet the results have not been commensurate with that. And I think what the chairman's point is well taken. If that is going to continue, and even in a greater way, then the accountability has to be stepped up, both from a statewide oversight level from the department, from individual school district level, because at the end of the day, this isn't just about spending money. This is about student achievement. We want every student to have the opportunity to succeed. And I think one of the things that you'll see in both reports, but particularly I'll highlight a little bit out of the minority report, is the structure and how we deliver education. It's changed fundamentally over the last 40, 50 years. So we've seen it change even fundamentally since COVID. The regionalization of services, the ability for school districts to work together and break down some of the silos that we've seen over the years in education. If we really want to see more of that money go directly to helping students, those silos need to be broken down. And so as we continue to talk about funding, which will always be an important component, we also have to talk about public policy surrounding the structure and how education is delivered. And also understanding that even through all of that, we acknowledge that there are students slipping through the cracks right now, and in some cases, many of them. And we need to do whatever we can to address that as we continue to try and work towards perfection in a system that may never reach perfection. But as both Chairman Schweyer and I note, never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We need to continue to work to improve it. But as we do that, we need to acknowledge that if there are areas where students, and if there are individual students that for whatever reason simply are not succeeding in their particular avenue of education, then they need to be able to find alternatives to that education. We need to be able to provide it.
Representative Schweyer, part of the point of having a commission is to, learn new stuff, collect new data. And I understand there was one point that has to do with the English learner population in Pittsburgh. It was noted that the English learner population in Pittsburgh is up 33% in 5 years. So why is that important in the context of our discussion today?
I appreciate that. So I live in Allentown, the city of Allentown. My children are students in the Allentown School District. My school district has kids that speak 26 different languages and dialects from 51 nations of origin. And each and one of those children that comes to our school that chooses to move to Pennsylvania, chooses to move to Allentown, just like Pittsburgh, just like Lancaster, just like Reading, just like York, just like so many of our rural populations that are now seeing a great migration in Luzerne County, Lackawanna County, Schuylkill County, those places. Those children, there are supports that are needed to help those kids get to the same places native-born American English-speaking children, right? Mm-hmm. There are just costs associated with it. And sometimes those costs associated with it are just simply providing support services so that child can learn English and go take history class mm-hmm. and go take English class and so forth. But then there are also just frankly immigrant children mm-hmm. that don't have the basic understanding of what it's like to be in an American school. They don't know what a school bell is. They don't know how to ask to go to the bathroom. I mean, think about how intimidating it is. We have 2 children from Somalia in the Allentown School District that I recently met. And the war-torn area of Somalia, through a refugee program and the faith-based organization, gets relocated here to Allentown. And they literally don't know how to ask to go to the bathroom. They don't speak English. They don't have those basic things that we all take for granted as people that were raised in the system. That costs money. That there are very real life support structures that need to be put in place. And I'm not even talking about what happens with those kids at home at 3:30, 4 o'clock. I'm literally just talking about the things that those kids need to be successful during the school day.
Representative Topper, how can we keep up with this demand then to educate English learners?
Well, and we also need to understand that support for the students, as the chairman mentioned, but also support for the staff. You know, in an area like Bedford County, if we have, if you have a young student, it's particularly a really young student in elementary school that moves into an area that in my Bedford is far different than Allentown, right? In terms of how many students are there. So you could have one student in the whole building, and there's not a staff member that can speak Spanish, for instance. And so how do you work with that student? You see it even with students who might have hearing difficulties. There's a wide range of areas where, as the chairman said, it costs money not just for the students, but also to support the staff, mm-hmm. to make sure that if we're going to start training our teachers to be able to, at least at a very basic level, communicate in other languages, that needs to start with higher education. Our teachers, our educators, my dad was a public educator for over 33 years. They now need to be, essentially, we need to make sure we're teaching them properly to adapt to this new world and in education. And so that's where I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a different tangent for our higher ed institutions to say, how are we teaching our future educators? Maybe working that into their preparation needs to be something that we have to look at as well.
Representatives Schweyer and Topper, thank you very much. We're going to give you a break just for a minute while we preview some shows here on PCN. On Wednesday, On the Issues has Senator Art Haywood on the subject of hate speech on campus. That's at 6 p.m. Then right after that, at 6:30 p.m., winter weather is the subject with the hosts of a show seen here on PCN, Weather World. Hosts Rob Leidick and John Neese will join us. On Thursday, Journalists Roundtable has Carter Walker of VoteBeat, John Delano of KDKA-TV, and Gillian McGoldrick of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they're on at 6 p.m. on Thursday. A Game of the Week returns to PCN this weekend, this Friday night. The high school boys of Selinsgrove and Shikellamy take to the mat, courtesy of Service Electric Cablevision in Danville at 7 p.m. On Saturday night, we'll have Archbishop Ryan versus Newman Goretti, courtesy of Sports Fan Base Network. That's at 7 p.m. After that, watch the Lancaster-Lebanon League High School Wrestling Championships. That's courtesy of Blue Ridge Communications in Ephrata at 9 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is the 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN continue to bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Okay, we're having a discussion with the chairman of the House Education Committee here today, and we have a call on the line, and it's from Marysville. George, you are on PCN.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I guess my question could be for both the gentlemen you have on your show today. There was tens of millions of dollars allocated for the Philadelphia school districts for to get rid of asbestos and lead paint, and this goes back a while because there was some questions asked about this as what happened to the money.
Representative Schweyer, can you start us off?
I'm not sure when that was allocated or what pot of money you're talking about, sir. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I'm not sure what you're referring to specifically. I will tell you that we have not spent, the Commonwealth has not spent a dollar on school construction since 2015, 2016, I believe, was the last year we put any money into it. And that was statewide for new school buildings to be constructed on a list that had existed for some period. I will tell you, when we toured our districts and when we heard from our superintendents and when we did a survey across school districts across Pennsylvania, facility concerns were at the very, very top of the concerns that we had heard from superintendents, from school board members, from advocates, and it was a significant part of the court case. So I won't talk about legislation that we passed. I will say in this year's budget, one of the things I'm most proud of is that for the first time in 8-ish years, 8 budget cycles, we finally started to put money into the all school districts, not just Philadelphia, but school districts across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to the tune of $175 million. Now, this is a drop in the bucket to the overall needs that we have. I will tell you, in my district alone, we have over $400 million of capital needs, not counting the new construction of 3 new schools that we need here in Allentown. And that is a story that's played out across the Commonwealth. So I'm proud of the fact that we were able to actually increase money and put money into something that so desperately has needed it from early on. But I can't speak specifically to the pot of money you're referring to, sir.
Representative Topper, go ahead.
Well, what I would like to say is that there was a large concern of mine, and Chairman knows this. I shared it with him. I shared it with members of the appropriations teams when I was on the appropriations committee. And again, I can't speak exactly which money was allocated, but I can say this. You know, we had a lot of federal, twice now we have had a huge, I'll call it a stimulus of dollars. One was under the Rendell administration of federal dollars, and now currently after COVID, this influx of federal money. And so much of that opportunity, in my opinion, this is my opinion, was wasted by not addressing the facility needs around our state. And when I say wasted, because we saw it kind of work into programming. Some of the money that I'm still trying to figure out where exactly it went. But I think that was twice that we had a tremendous opportunity to really address one time, and when I say one time, for the next 30, 40, 50 years, costs in our education system when it came to facilities. And we just weren't able to have the political will to get it done, because sometimes it's a much easier decision to just let that money flow into programming. And I really think we had missed opportunities both of those times. And this is not the first time I'm saying it. So I'm not speaking out of school. I've been kind of outspoken about that. When we are able to have the opportunity to make investments, that's really where the government needs to step in and make those, as opposed to just seeing money kind of go into the black holes of government as it has so many times over the years.
Well, that caller we had on a minute ago is from Philadelphia, and he is concerned primarily with asbestos and lead paint remediation in the Philadelphia area. But let's continue to emphasize how big a problem maintenance of school buildings statewide is. And I understand the commission learned while they were putting their report together that the majority of our 500 school districts have buildings that need major repairs. Are those repairs underway, Representative Schweyer?
Are they under the way?
How much progress is being made on taking care of these concerns that seem urgent and should be addressed right away?
That is a hard answer because it really varies school district to school district. Like everything else, curriculum, technology, number of teachers, it really is entirely based on the difference between school districts that have money and school districts that don't. So if you're Lower Merion School District, you are perfectly financially in a position to be able to pump tremendous amounts of money into your facilities and never have to worry about toxic schools, never have to worry about heat or air conditioning, never have to worry about a leaky swimming pool in their gymnasium or a paved parking lot. When you go to poor school districts, literally across City Avenue and going to Philadelphia, you have a school district that has billions of dollars of financial needs in terms of facilities. I took a tour of South Philadelphia High School. And when you walked in the basement, the electrician I was with audibly gasped at the type of electrical systems that they have there. We have school districts that don't have heat. And so the answer is really as unique as all 500 school districts. The districts that have money are doing an excellent job of maintaining their buildings, and the school districts that are most at risk aren't.
Also, while I agree, it tends to also reflect what local communities have done. But I'll also say this, and this is where I'll just push back a little bit. There are also some school districts, including districts of areas that I represent. So I'm going to take it out of the Philadelphia school district for a second, that have not kept up their local effort. I mean, that's something that we also learned as we toured the state. You can when you're a local school district and you say, well, we've not raised taxes for 7 years. Oh, and our building's falling apart. Oh, and the state come in and bail us out. Well, now, wait a minute. As we look at that from a state perspective, you have not attempted to keep up with your building.
Maybe a tax increase was in order.
Well, and also, as I like to say, locally, if I raise taxes in Harrisburg, how much of that money comes back to Bedford, right? But if you keep up with your tax effort in a Bedford type school district, area school district where my kids go to school, all that money stays local. So again, there's a lot of conversation we can have. There are some areas that, quite frankly, the property taxes are out of control. And then there's some areas where it's not. So it's not just about which areas have received state funding. It's also about which areas have kept up with their facilities. And some school districts have done an outstanding job, even with limited resources, and some school districts have not. And so that's why I think an important component of the recommendations that I believe both reports made, Pete can correct me if I'm wrong, was about a study for facilities throughout the Commonwealth and asking school districts, telling that they need to provide us with what they're doing and what they have looked at in terms of facility upkeep and maintenance and potentially new buildings to ensure the accountability, like our previous caller mentioned, that if they are going to receive dollars, that we have a better understanding at the state level of who's been taking care of their facilities, who hasn't, and where the needs are the most and what they are. We need that information from our local school districts. That's another thing that we found as we toured the state in this Basic Education Funding Commission.
And given the work of the commission, Representative Schweyer, what taxpayer accountability measures can be put in place? And was that addressed in the current report?
In the majority report, the answer is yes. So two things that we did. Again, both the minority report and the majority report talked about accountability measures that our school districts have to take to ensure that the dollars that the Commonwealth is investing is actually being put into classroom improvements, things that are going to improve the education outcome of the students that they serve. But in the majority report, we added an additional component to address that very issue that Chair Topper just mentioned, in that there are school districts that are taxing themselves to oblivion to try to keep up with the financial costs of educating their kids. And then there are school districts that just simply aren't. And it's unfair for us, and I couldn't agree with Jesse more, it's unfair for the Commonwealth to continue to invest in school districts when the community doesn't want to invest in them. And there are many instances of school districts that are taxing themselves at the maximum or close to the maximum each and every year. They're adding property taxes each and every year to their schools. We see it throughout eastern Pennsylvania, throughout southern Pennsylvania, and significant portions of central and western Pennsylvania. And then you have school districts that aren't. And so we added a very unique component into the majority report that would provide almost $1 billion of tax relief to the school districts that are trying their best. And by trying their best, I mean actually funding their schools to the best of their ability based on their local tax effort. And that was something that was part of the court case and that we included in our budget as well.
We'll be taking viewer phone calls for about the next 10 minutes, folks. Let's go to Reading and hear from Pauline. Go ahead. Pauline, are you there? Gentlemen, let's get some closure on the report from the Basic Education Commission. In other words, are your recommendations in time to be folded into the governor's new budget proposal coming up?
Oh, I'm not dumb enough to try to speak for the governor. The governor's team was a part of this process the entire time. They were active participants, and they ultimately voted on the majority report.
Look, I mean, the timing was a part of this from the beginning. We wanted to make sure that there was enough information that the governor had so that he could present whatever he was going to present in his address. And I certainly am not privy to exactly what that will be, but we'll find out here in a couple weeks. But just to tie a bow on the conversation that we were just having around local effort. I want to be clear. One of the reasons why the minority diverted from the majority in terms of that particular issue, even though we both agree that communities have to show that they have skin in the game and are invested as well, that's not always reflected simply by taxes. So there are school districts that are raising taxes to the max that, quite frankly, are being very poor stewards of both the local and the state dollars. And so it's not always reflective in taxing effort. We need to find other ways, and I don't have all the answers to that right now, but we need to understand that the accountability really needs to circle around one of the main things is student performance. And when I say student performance, I don't just mean testing. I mean attendance. I mean graduation rate. I mean staff attendance. There are other measures that we have other than just testing to ensure whether a school is improving and using their local and state tax dollars appropriately.
Now, gentlemen, let's change the subject to a legislative matter that's out there. I understand a Democratic House committee approved a bill that would have students, they would be able to take up to 3 days to rest and recharge. Representative Schweyer, can you comment on that? And why do they need that?
Yeah, I'll take it actually a little bit further. It's not so much rest and recharge. It's an opportunity to have days off, take a couple of basically sick days addressing mental health concerns. And we all know, and we hear it from members of both political parties, that there is a mental health crisis in our schools, in our communities. And what we want to do is start the process of, or continue the process of destigmatizing students and families making decisions for the own health and well-being of their children. I have 2 kids, and the number of times that me and parents that I know have called in a sick day for their kid when, basically fibbed and just saying, oh, my child has a sore throat. They didn't have a sore throat. They were having a bad day at home, or there was some other issue that needed to be addressed. Let's stop pretending that mental health isn't an important component of a student's well-being, and let's just, authorize it. Now, it's not an ideal solution, and the legislation may need a little bit work before it passes on the floor. If it's brought up for the floor, I don't want to speak for all members of the House, but the idea is to give parents a little bit more flexibility and ultimately destigmatize the issue of mental health days.
So, Representative Topper, what do you think of these mental health days being proposed for students?
Well, Chairman Schweyer was correct earlier that a lot of legislation that has passed out of committee has been bipartisan. This was not one of those pieces. Members of the committee on my side and myself share some concerns. And while I appreciate the overall thought that went behind it, and I do think destigmatizing mental health concerns is certainly appropriate, and I think it's being done. I'm still someone who believes that if a child is going to miss school, which we have seen to be a real detriment. I mean, we saw it over COVID. We really want our kids in school as much as possible. If they're going to miss a day, I would still like to see that signed off by a professional, whether it be medical, whether it be mental health. If that is the reason, look, there's so much flexibility that already exists. We see educational field trips to Disney World, right? Like there's still that flexibility that exists in our school system. I think I applaud many of our efforts. This is just not one that I supported. However, I do think that it's a plea that I made at the end of our hearings, which I appreciate Chairman Schweyer having the hearings surrounding the mental health of our student, really comes back to home. I also have two boys in public school, 17 and 15. I share Chairman Schweyer's concerns. I see the immense pressures that are placed upon our kids these days, pressures that I never had to deal with, Pete never had to deal with, certainly our parents, grandparents didn't deal with. They dealt with other pressures, but not the kind that we see right now. And just imploring parents and communities and grandparents, caregivers, religious institutions to really ease up on the pressure on some of these kids so that they can be kids, and hopefully that will make a big difference in improving their mental health as well.
Here's a phone call from Lancaster. Ed, you're on PCN.
Good morning. Yes, Representative Topper, in his answering the last question, said something that sparked my interest and presented a question to ask. He mentioned something about staff attendance as an issue in his explanation of a previous question.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go into that. There are school districts where the morale of our educators and our staff are so low that we're seeing an increased need for substitutes, and because they're simply not coming to work. There are areas around Pennsylvania where we're seeing them leave the profession. You can tell. I've had the opportunity in this job to tour school districts all across, not just my district, but other districts. It's one of the more rewarding parts of this job. You can tell when you walk into a building where the morale of that staff is. And if we don't increase that, if we don't have staff members from administrators to educators to those who are working in the kitchen to those who are providing the maintenance on the grounds on a daily basis, if you don't have those adults that are excited to be there, then you're not going to have students that are excited to be there. It's just that simple. And so that's a big part of the conversation that we need to have regarding public education in Pennsylvania.
We have about 2 minutes left for our discussion, gentlemen, and I want to move on to a somewhat related matter. This has to do with your committee, the House Education Committee, requiring school counselors to spend a set time on academics, the students' academics, their emotional state, and career options. Representative Schweyer, take about 30 seconds to talk about that, please.
There is a significant problem in language in the way that we talk about school guidance counselors. School counselors aren't therapists. They're not mental health professionals. They are there to provide a whole host of other services to help our kids be successful. And we want them to be in that lane and not pretend or mislead parents, students, and other faculty that they are direct mental health support people. So what we're trying to do is address the issues of academic achievement, address the issue of direction for our students, the ones that want to go into a career in technical school, the ones that want to go off to college, the ones that want to do something else afterwards, join the military, what have you, that they have clear support and direction that will push kids into the right direction and make sure they achieve their goals, not make an assumption or pretending that they are a therapist or a mental health professional.
Our guests have been the chairman of the House Education Committee, Jesse Topper for the Republicans, and Peter Schweyer for the Democrats, the majority. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Earlier, I talked to Senator Jarrett Coleman about legalizing the use of drones while hunting in Pennsylvania. According to your bill, how could a hunter use a drone?
Well, it's pretty simple, and with the intention behind the change to the legislation, would allow a hunter to use a drone to recover a deer or game that had been killed, that they were unable to recover after exhausting every other reasonable measure.
So it seems that the key distinction here is to realize that you want the drone to be used for recovery, as opposed to, say, a hunter able to locate a live deer that's just over the hill.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. There is quite a bold distinction. It's not even a gray area. It's very black and white here. It's simply, are we in a day and age where we're going to allow technology to help us prevent wasting an animal that has been killed? Mm-hmm. Are we going to allow the use of a drone to recover a deer or other game that's been killed? Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good time to have the discussion. Certainly, it is just recovery. This is not spotting. It's not driving deer. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, I speak with many hunters who they explain to me the agonizing situation, or some hunters have had a time where they've shot a deer and they can't recover it, and just how devastating it is when they know they were unable. They tried to follow the blood trail, but maybe it was raining and they lost the blood trail, or it became very dark and they lose the animal. And to be able to have a tool that hunters could then deploy after exhausting every other reasonable measure that would allow them to recover the deer, so that it doesn't go to waste. That's simply what we're looking to do. And we're in that process right now of having those discussions with stakeholders to see if do we want to be able to prevent wasting the animal.
And it seems on a fairly regular basis, we hear about new proposed ways to use drones, from monitoring disaster areas or delivering packages. So how did the use of drones while hunting come to your attention in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question. Believe it or not, I was watching YouTube one night, as I do, and the algorithms were letting me watch some hunting videos, and I saw this story about a hunter. It was a video in Ohio, or a gentleman who had shot a deer, and he called in a drone recovery company to assist in finding the deer. He used every method he could to try to find the deer. He was trying to follow the blood trail, but had lost it, and it was going on to a point where he was concerned about the deer spoiling. So he called the drone recovery team. They located the deer. And they told him, though, that they would be, maybe it wasn't Ohio, actually, but it was another state. And they said they couldn't. Mm-hmm. They showed him where the deer was. And they said, here it is. Here's a photo of, they showed him the deer, but they couldn't tell him where it was. And they said, yes, sir, it's a nice buck. In fact, you shot it, but I can't tell you where it is.
There was a gentleman in Chester County, I understand, and he was using a drone illegally. So that makes me think about the current law regarding this. So if someone is caught using a drone improperly during hunting, what are the consequences now? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, so that's ultimately what happened. That's ultimately what happened, in Pennsylvania here, was that I was unaware that it was going on in Pennsylvania. I couldn't believe that this was a thing here. When I saw the original video of it happening in another state, I said, well, that's a shame, but surely that's not an issue in Pennsylvania. And then I saw the situation, I think it was out towards Lancaster County with the situation. And it was unbelievable when I heard this was actually going on. And so what I found out was that we actually treat the law differently throughout the state. So it isn't fair for a hunter in Pennsylvania to have, hunt by different standards across the state. And it seems that some wardens, according to those that have seen drones being used, some wardens have a favorable view toward them, while other ones are issuing citations. In this instance, with the gentleman out towards Lancaster there, I think it was a spotlighting fine. I think it was a use of a drone, and I think it was ultimately civil penalties up. It looks like $2,500, and quite substantive. There was also a sting operation that was deployed to follow the gentleman. So at the end of the day, it's not all hunters in Pennsylvania should know that whether you're hunting in Lehigh County or you're out in St. Mary's, that you're hunting under the same rules, and knowing that it will be enforced equally throughout the state. And that's why we're trying to have a modern discussion on the topic.
So let's consider, Senator, the perspective of the PA Federation of Sportsmen. And after all, the use of drones, as you know, can be controversial, especially during warfare. And so questions of ethics come up. So I understand the PA Federation of Sportsmen, they support what they call the idea of a fair chase. And what do they mean by that? And what do you say to them anyway?
Yeah, I'm not sure fair chase really. I think there becomes a discussion: does fair chase continue after an animal's dead? Does fair chase extend after you've killed an animal? I'm not sure that fair chase should extend. The idea that I don't think that really, we should have a discussion of when the hunting versus recovery begins. And with technology available today, are we going to use that technology to aid in the recovery and the prevention to prevent the loss of the animal?
Last question, Senator. Just how interested, you said discussions are going on right now. As far as you can tell, how interested are hunters in using drones, again, for this very specific purpose, recovering game after the animal has been taken down?
Yeah, I mean, originally we thought it would be a mixed review, but almost every hunter that we've spoken to seems to support the idea that it's just another tool that could be used. Most hunters say they use blood trails and that works just fine, but it would be nice for them to know that they could have another tool that they could put in their pocket, quite literally with a 249-gram drone that they could have in their bag. They could use every method they have available right now to recover the deer. But if they ran into a situation where they were unable to recover it, being able to use something else, another tool to recover the deer, was something that they thought was worth talking about.
Senator Jarrett Coleman, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Now, a reminder about Wednesday. On the Issues has Senator Art Haywood on the subject of hate speech on campus at 6 p.m. Then right after that at 6:30 p.m., our guests will be Rob Leidick and John Neese, the hosts of the PCN show Weather World. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.